Supreme Court, including the president's appointees, have declared that he is not above the law.
They want to appoint Supreme Court justices who will utterly obliterate your Constitution, and you now see how important the Supreme Court is.
Its recent rulings have put the U.S. Supreme Court in the spotlight ahead of the presidential elections. Hello, I'm Ghida Fakhry. Welcome to the program. In a series of rulings that have defied expectations, the Supreme Court has become a divisive campaign issue in what has already become one of the most contentious elections in U.S. history. 2 of the 9 justices on the court, appointed under Trump, joined Chief Justice John Roberts and the 4 liberal justices in rejecting Trump's claim of absolute immunity from criminal investigations. The president responded to the ruling that he must hand over his financial records to a New York investigator, calling it, quote, political prosecution and prosecutorial misconduct. In a separate ruling, the Supreme Court limited Congress's ability to pursue subpoenas for the president's personal information, denying lawmakers access to his tax records for now. Chief Justice Roberts, who wrote both these opinions, provided the crucial swing vote in recent 5-4 rulings on immigration, abortion, and gay and transgender rights. The conservative Chief Justice, who was appointed under George W. Bush, has come under attack from conservatives for siding with the liberals on the bench. Meanwhile, President Trump took justice into his own hands last week, commuting the 40-month prison sentence of longtime friend and advisor Roger Stone. He was convicted of 7 felony charges, including lying under oath to Congress during an investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. Now, with Trump trailing Biden in the polls as coronavirus cases skyrocket in some of his stronghold states, how will the court's decisions affect the conservative vote, especially among evangelicals? To bring this in focus, I'm joined by former Arkansas governor and 2-time Republican presidential candidate, Mike Huckabee. Governor Huckabee, you consider yourself and you describe yourself as a social conservative, a Christian evangelical. You've long had an issue with the Supreme Court, but you've recently taken on the Chief Justice. You've gone after him. He is also a conservative who was appointed under a Republican president. You've asked for his resignation. Why should the Chief Justice resign?
Well, I think it's because he's decided that instead of being a member of the judicial branch, he wants to be a member of the legislative branch. I think a lot of people have flunked 9th grade civics in America. They don't understand that the 3 branches of government are very distinct and separate, and they're also equal. The judicial branch doesn't hold sway over the executive and the legislative. And the judicial branch does not have the authority, not in the Constitution, to create legislation or, in essence, to create those policies that it wish were there. But that's the job of the legislature.
But the role of justices on the Supreme Court is to opine and to render rulings on some major issues in the United States. Are you faulting the Chief Justice for siding with the liberals on the bench in a few cases?
I am, because there is a doctrine of judicial activism, if you will, or maybe even more dangerously, judicial supremacy. It's the notion that the judicial branch can tell the legislative and executive branches what it must do and enforce it. Well, it can't. And this goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson, who made it very clear that if there was a weak branch of the 3 branches, it would be the judicial. And also, when Andrew Jackson was president and the Supreme Court ruled against him, he basically told him, he said, look, if you think that that's the law, then you come and enforce it.
But you are attacking the Chief Justice. But Governor Huckabee, you are attacking the Chief Justice for essentially doing his job. You have said that John Roberts stabbed the American people in the back. I presume by American people you mean conservative Americans. The reality is that this conservative-led Supreme Court has more often than not advanced conservative issues.
The disappointment with John Roberts specifically is that while he indicated when his confirmation process was going on that he was a strict constructionist, which meant that he let the words of the Constitution speak for themselves. He didn't try to reinterpret them. But when you decide that the word sex from 1964 in the Civil Rights Act now means transgenderism, you read something in that absolutely, positively did not mean that in 1964. It was a ruling in which the justices of the Supreme Court decided that they would rule according to what they thought Congress should do, not what Congress has ever done. And that's a big distinction. He betrayed what, and it's not just him.
But he would
there are
argue,
a lot of the justices who do that.
But Governor Huckabee, he'd argue that he was giving an interpretation of the law based on today's understanding of what it meant. It was a very broad legislation back in 1964, as you say, and it is very much in line with public opinion today. Just look at the facts. 9 in 10 Americans say that discrimination on the basis of sex is illegal.
Sex meaning gender, sex not meaning 64 different genders. In 1964, the common prevailing view was that there was 2 genders, men and women. That's where they failed. Congress has every right to go back and redefine the word sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. They can do that, just like they can go back and make abortion legal. They can make same-sex marriage legal, but that's a legislative act. The executive branch, the president, has the power of the sword, and the Supreme Court has the power of opinion, but only opinion. It has neither the person or the sword. That was Thomas Jefferson. So my pushback here, and it's strong, is that we have a very modern, very recently adopted view of the judicial branch that defies the original intent that the Constitution gave the judicial branch, and it has resulted in chaos within our culture, in our laws, and in our country.
But wouldn't you agree, Governor Huckabee, that it's also resulted in the widely held perception that this Supreme Court is overly politicized? In fact, the Chief Justice himself had to make a rare statement outside of the court a couple of years ago saying this:
"We do not sit on opposite sides of an aisle. We do not caucus in separate rooms. We do not serve one party or one interest. We serve one nation."
So it isn't just Chief Justice Roberts, it's the Supreme Court as a whole, which is keenly aware of the responsibility it has and the fact that it needs to stand up, as it has, defying expectations time and again, stand up to the executive branch and to Congress.
And they should do that, but they shouldn't make decisions of policy. So when they stand up, as you say, to the executive or the legislative branch, the job of the other 2 branches is to say, yeah, the courts have it right. We need to go back and legislate that. We need to make that into law so that we will be in compliance. The judicial branch cannot make a law. They don't have that power. They just don't.
But they can make rulings, and they have, in fact, recently 2 rulings, one that has not gone in the direction President Trump might have hoped for. The Supreme Court rejecting the president's claim that he had complete immunity from prosecution or from, being investigated in a criminal case. In fact, the court rejected that argument unanimously. The Chief Justice wrote this. He said, "In our judicial system, the public has a right to every man's evidence. No citizen, not even the president, is categorically above the common duty to produce evidence when called upon in a criminal proceeding." In fact, 2 Trump nominees, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, also rejected the president's unprecedented claims of immunity from investigation. Was this then the right ruling by the Supreme Court?
I think it most likely was. I'm not questioning that. I think you're missing my point. I'm not saying the Supreme Court doesn't have the power of review. That's exactly the power they have. Their job is to review the various laws and statutes and make sure that they're consistent with the Constitution. That's what they attempted to do in this case. What I'm suggesting is, and I'm not just suggesting it, I'm imploring you to go to the Constitution and prove me wrong. I'm saying that the court does not have the power to make up what they wish the law was. They have every right. In fact, they have the absolute responsibility to tell us what the law is and to make sure that we're abiding by it. But they don't have the power to say, well, I know this isn't what the law is, but it's what the law ought to be. And since the Congress hasn't had the guts to write it, we'll just do it for them. That's what they can't do. And that's exactly what they've been doing. That's what judicial supremacy is, and it's a very dangerous thing because it means that you're taking power away from the people who were elected by the voters, and you're giving it to unelected, appointed people who have their jobs for life. The founders were very afraid of that. That's why they created three branches of government. That's why they gave limitations to each branch. And it's why we have the very unique checks and balances in our system that virtually no other country has.
So when the president, though, says this in a tweet, that the courts in the past have given broad deference, but not me, do you believe that he has a case? Do you believe that he is the victim of political prosecution? Does the court have to show deference to presidents?
No, the courts don't have to show deference to a president, but the court needs to be very careful that it does not step over their authority and to impose upon one branch of government what it isn't imposing upon itself or the other branch of government. Let's be very clear. I think the question is different as to what the law requires for the president to do in terms of giving various forms of evidence or testimony. But what the courts should not be able to do is allow Congress or anyone to go on a fishing expedition to completely distract what the president is trying to do with his job just to make it difficult for him. That is an obstruction of justice in itself. And so
but
it's
they specifically, but Governor, they specifically didn't. They specifically, forgive me for interrupting you, did not go on that fishing expedition when, in another separate ruling, they said that it was up to the lower courts to decide on whether or not Congress would have access to his tax returns, specifically because they wanted to veer away from any political meddling.
Well, that's what they said. But the fact is, the law does not require any candidate. I've been a presidential candidate twice. I've been a candidate for governor, lieutenant governor, U.S. Senate. So I've been on the ballot a few times, and I know something about the requirements. There is absolutely zero requirement that you give your tax returns in public. You just don't have to. I would go further to say that the requirement
every president has.
Let me finish,
every president has since Jimmy Carter, except this president.
Doesn't matter. Every president might wear white socks. That doesn't mean the next one has to. The point is, what is the law? You're talking about public opinion. You may be talking about peer pressure. You may be talking about political expediency. We're talking about the law, and the law does not require disclosure of tax returns. Now, what it does require is a very, very thorough disclosure of personal finance. And that, quite frankly, reveals a heck of a lot more than for most people a tax return does. So this idea that the president hasn't disclosed anything is utter nonsense. There is nothing in the law that requires the disclosure of tax returns. Now, if Congress wants that, let's go back to my point. If that's what Congress wants candidates to do, they have the power to do that. They can go in and make a law that requires you, if you're going to be a candidate for federal office, that you have to give up your tax returns. But why haven't they done that? I'll tell you why. They don't want to give up their tax returns. And so they haven't done it. And until they do, it isn't the law. Why demand someone obey something that isn't the law?
All right, Governor Huckabee, good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
You bet. Thank you.
Now, while President Trump has announced that he will release his list of possible Supreme Court nominees by September to shore up conservative support ahead of the elections, just as he did in 2016, his Democratic rival, former Vice President Joe Biden, says he is looking at potential candidates, including, quote, a group of African-American women who are qualified and have the experience to be on the court. Biden has been facing pressure from liberals within the Democratic Party who say they want to see more specific policy proposals and remain skeptical about the former vice president's willingness to be a transformative leader. Releasing his long-awaited economic agenda, Biden vowed to help America build back better with a $700 billion proposal to invest in American manufacturing.
When we spend taxpayers' money, when the federal government spends taxpayers' money, we should use it to buy American products and support American jobs.
With rising poll numbers despite a limited presence on the campaign trail and critics saying his economic plan includes empty promises, will revealing a judicial agenda and nominating liberal justices be a priority for Biden and Democratic voters? Joining me now for an in-depth look at the Biden campaign is former Secretary of the Democratic National Committee and former mayor of Baltimore, Stephanie Rawlings-Blake. Madam Mayor, the Supreme Court has once again, through its recent rulings, shown just how important it is during election season. It is an issue that is really important for socially conservative Republican voters. Just how significant, how important an issue is it for Democratic voters, especially the more progressive among them?
I think it's important for progressives, but I think it is important for everyone who believes in democracy and believes that at all levels of government, the government should reflect the people that it represents. And when you have the conservative wing of the Republican Party being such a small portion of our population and them having such a heavy hand on the federal court and the Supreme Court, it makes me understand, and hopefully others understand, how just vitally important it is to get out the vote. Because if we do not, the rulings that come out of the federal court and the Supreme Court will be out of line with the majority of Americans, and we cannot afford.
But how much will it motivate the vote for Biden supporters, Democratic supporters, and independents?
You know, I'm hopeful that the recent rulings, particularly around the anti-discrimination with the LGBTQ community, hopefully that will help to motivate our voters. But traditionally, the courts have not been a significant motivator for Democrats and progressives, and that's unfortunate because the hard right wing of the Republican Party has operated with unwavering support for Republican candidates who promise to keep the courts conservative.
But isn't that starting to change? Progressives have been pointing out that 15 of the last 19 appointees on the Supreme Court have been nominated by Republican presidents. In 6 out of the 7 cases, presidents who did not win the popular vote, they want to change this. So how much of a priority will it be for Biden to actually make sure that this Supreme Court, if he is elected, becomes more reflective of Americans as a whole? How important is it for him to name liberal justices?
Oh, it's essential. And I know that Vice President Biden will definitely do it. The question is trying to ensure that all of the voters on the Democratic side and the discerning independents will come out and support. So it's not a matter of us not understanding the importance. We understand the importance. It's just motivating the voters to vote in their own best interest. I hope we don't get caught up on these litmus tests. Well, if you're not for immediately expanding the Supreme Court, well, we can't come out and support you. We're not in that election. We don't have that luxury. We have to support Joe Biden because we know that at the end of the day, we will be closer to the ideals that most Americans value with Joe Biden as our president.
But even though he is ahead in virtually every poll, Joe Biden still seems unable to excite his base. Does he have a strategy, though, that goes beyond the anti-Trump rhetoric?
He definitely has a strategy that goes beyond the anti-Trump rhetoric. When you listen to him talk about his plans about police reform and criminal justice reform, that's not anti-Trump rhetoric. That is listening to the people in this country who want better, want safer communities, and want to expand the concept of policing and being open to holding officers accused of wrongdoing more accountable and looking for alternatives to incarceration. That's not anti-Trump. That is pro-America. And when you look at his economic plan, the focus on expanding caregivers so we can add supports that are needed to our damaged economy, damaged because President Trump has failed the American people in his botched response to the coronavirus. So you look at Joe Biden's plan about manufacturing and understanding how important it is to have those manufacturing jobs right here in this country. That's not anti-Trump, that's pro-America. And I think it will continue to resonate with voters across the country.
Is Joe Biden, though, doing enough to appeal to an important part of the American electorate, African-American voters, specifically women voters?
You say enough. I don't think it's ever enough until we're at the finish line. But does he understand the value of African American voters, and particularly African American women voters? Absolutely. And you don't have to look far. Look at the team that he surrounds himself with. Look at the administration that he was a part of. It was a diverse administration that was not dependent on cronyism. It was dependent on reaching out to the best and the brightest across the country and using their skills and talent to move our country forward. And that's what motivates me to do the work that I'm doing as a surrogate, because I believe that is how we are going to get America moving again.
And obviously, he was trying to appeal to this segment of the electorate, African American women, when he made this statement at one of the Democratic debates.
I'm looking forward to making sure there's a black woman on the Supreme Court.
This seemed to be a very well calculated, politically calculated move to attract African American women. Will it work?
I think it is fair to say it's a political calculation, but I also think it's fair to say it's about time. We have venerable, African American women jurists who are more than qualified to sit on the Supreme Court. I think it speaks to Joe Biden's values when he's willing to step up and say that I will be the one to appoint an African American woman to the Supreme Court. It is long overdue, and I appreciate the fact that he's willing to stand up for the people who stand up for him.
But why has he been reluctant to share his list of potential nominees? President Trump said this.
I'll be soon announcing a new list of exceptional candidates for the United States Supreme Court, and I'll choose only from that list 100%, probably 25 incredible people, any one of which could be a great justice, any one of which. And I did it last time, and people loved when I did it, and I'll only pick from that list. Biden can't release his list because the names would be too extreme, too radical. They wouldn't be acceptable, but they will be very radical people.
So how does Joe Biden counter these accusations?
I don't think he needs to counter the accusations. The narrative is false. Trump puts out a list so he can secure his radical right base. That is what motivates them, and that's why he does it. That is not a normal part of any presidential campaign to release a list. Why? Because under normal circumstances, people know that when you have a president that engenders trust, that you will have the best and the brightest that want to be a part of that administration, and you can trust that they will put great people in office. Appoint great people to positions of trust, and that's that has been the history of our country, Republican and Democrat. But when you have someone whose top qualifications are loyalty and familiarity, really family links, he has to do things like put out a list so people can trust his judgment. So I don't believe in that narrative at all. I trust that Joe Biden will do as he has done in the past, and that is surround himself with the best and the brightest to select smart, talented, ethical individuals who believe in our country, not in the cult of personality, to be in positions where we, the people, need them to serve.
All right, Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, former mayor of Baltimore. A pleasure to have you on the program. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, whether or not the composition of the Supreme Court will become a major campaign issue remains to be seen. Both sides have an interest it does. With Ruth Bader Ginsburg, 87, and Stephen Breyer, 81, the seats of these two liberal justices may become vacant during the next administration. And in the US system, one of the most important and long-lasting decisions a president can make is to select prospective Supreme Court justices, a lifelong appointment. With the court's composition already tilting to the right, the Republican Party, and above all its base, know full well that a second Trump term is critical to sealing the conservative leanings of the Supreme Court for decades to come, and maybe then it could overturn its 1973 landmark ruling on abortion. But that is all political calculus and machination. The court has its own mind, as recent rulings against the administration have shown, prompting the president to call justices, quote, politicians in black robes, in a country where justices are venerated. Chief Justice Roberts tried to persuade the public that justices are fair-minded, legal umpires, not politicians in black robes. In a rare and direct rebuttal of the president's accusation, his words hold added weight ahead of the presidential election. Many already see the strong possibility of a contested result in the next election in a highly polarized environment. The very independence and neutrality of the court is being taken to task. And so, in short, the right-leaning Supreme Court wants to shake off the perception that it may be beholden to a party. This may explain some of its recent rulings and why the Chief Justice may have sided with his liberal colleagues as he tries to reaffirm the court's independence and its credibility. Let us know what you think, but for now, from me and the entire team here in Washington, thanks for watching.